everyone to our virtual chat on mental health. Just a couple little notes and a welcome from the Chamber. We certainly know these are challenging times for business, and as the Chamber of Commerce representing the business community here, we're listening to the needs of everyone in the community that we can, and trying to find ways that we can offer support. And certainly employer-employee mental health is a primary concern and something that we're keeping front of mind. A little bit about our organization. So we've been around 130 years. It's an anniversary this year for us. And one of the things that we do, we have policies at the Chamber that we have as primary advocacy topics. And one of those is addressing entrepreneurship mental health. Our Chamber led a national effort to have it on the books at the Canadian Chamber of Commerce as a focus for business across the country. And we did that in partnership and got some good feedback from Susan at CMHA here locally that enabled us to put that on a national stage. And since that time, the national organization has made it a primary focus and has pushed the agenda harder than they ever have before. And we appreciate the local support in giving us the ability to have the voices heard of business across Canada and to be able to leverage those supports for business that are so needed. So we have certainly had tremendous stresses placed upon employers, employees, and everyone in our community, from the province declaring a state of emergency, the first in my lifetime and many, I'm sure, on March 22nd, and then compounding that are terrible tragedies that have happened within our communities on April 18th and 19th, where we're all dealing with things that we haven't had to deal with before. And bringing us together today with experts in their field to talk about mental health and some tips and helping us find some coping skills, as well as connecting with really important resources, I think will help in some ways provide that support that's really needed. So I will introduce our panelists that have gratefully offered their time to us, and we really appreciate that. So Pascal Atkin, if you want to give us a wave, Pascal is with Mindful Care Consulting. Ruth Mitchell is with SoulSpace Counselling and Therapy. Irene Gunn is with Transforming Tides Counselling. And Susan Henderson is the Executive Director of the Canadian Mental Health Association, Colchester East Hants Branch. So I would ask that everyone in the meeting room now, please mute your lines so we don't have background noise. And if anyone has a question, we do have some questions that we're prepared to ask, but there is a chat box if you look at the bottom of your screen in the center. Anyone that would like to type in anything that you'd like added for a question or part of the conversation, some comments. And following this session, we will send out an email to everyone that was on this webinar today with resources that are referenced throughout the conversation. So I'm going to start by asking each of our presenters to do a little introduction about themselves and the role that they play within our mental health fabric in the community. So I'll ask Pascal if you'd like to unmute your mic, and we'll hear from you first.
Hi, I'm Pascal Atkin from Mindful Care Consulting. I offer workshops for employees around mental health. I usually focus on stress and burnout. It's definitely needed right now, but I've been working on kind of pivoting my business online. I usually do workshops in person, and they're usually about 4 hours to a day long. But starting next week, I'm going to be offering support groups. Usually around 8 to 10 people works best, but most businesses have more employees than that. So I'm working on ways to kind of split people up and support them the best I can. Yeah, that's it essentially. Okay. I'm also still offering my regular services and offering courses, but how that's delivered to each individual business is different. Some people are working from home. Some people are still working, at their physical businesses. So it's been a challenge to reach everybody, but we're getting there.
think everything that we knew changed, and we're all trying to find new ways to make those things work. So Irene, could you give us an introduction and let us know what services you offer?
Hi, I'm Irene Gunn, and I'm the owner of Transforming Tides Counselling. So really, my focus in my work is to bring care and compassion to people who are struggling with mental health and emotional distress. And together we find a way to implement strategies, tools, so that people can have a much more fulfilling life. And I find the basis of my work is really on the topics of anxiety and depression. And also I work with issues around grief and couples, relationship counseling, and stress management, and certainly addiction and trauma recovery as well. And I recently became certified as a meditation mindfulness teacher. So I've been doing community programs around teaching mindfulness, and that's essentially helping us how to build more calmness, focus, and productivity in our lives, and how to strengthen our brain for the long haul. Because generally, we have a lot of anxiety in our lives, and it's important to find those ways to just take it down a little and build more calmness. And I also offer workshops on stress management and productivity too for the community and for workplaces. And, you know, I have to say that I live here in rural Colchester County out on the bay, and I work on my own mental health every day. Because, you know, having mental wellness doesn't necessarily come naturally. It's something that we intentionally need to foster. And so I'm on that journey with everybody. And I'm really thankful to have this opportunity to have this conversation. Thanks so much to the Chamber for organizing this, because it's so important right now.
It's our pleasure. And I'm going to give a shout out to my events and special projects coordinator, Chelsea, because she looks after our events, and she was the one that had spearheaded putting this together for us. So thank you very much, Chelsea. You're doing a great job. So Ruth, I'll ask you to do an introduction and let us know what services you offer.
Hi everyone, I'm Ruth Mitchell, and I have a private practice called SoulSpace Counselling Therapy. I've been in counseling for maybe around 10 years and a private practice for about 7. I'm a registered counseling therapist with the province of Nova Scotia, or Nova Scotia College Counseling Therapist, and a Canadian certified counselor. It's kind of like a second career for me. I started out with I have an MA in leisure admin, so I've done on the side of physical activity. So I've branched into the mental side at one point, and I feel like they're all linked, or they are all linked, and this is a natural connection. So I do offer telemental health services as well. So that's something I started doing a couple of years ago, and now is our necessity. And I have so I've continued to see clients in this respect under a secure video platform. And yeah, so that's most. I've worked in a lot of different with other agencies as well. I've worked within domestic violence and grief and Mi'kmaq family and that sort of thing. So a variety of services.
Wonderful. That it's so rewarding to know that these services are right here in our own community in Colchester County, and that people are so willing to reach out and offer their time and help. Susan, would you like to share with us a bit about what you do?
Sure, I'd love to. I'm the Executive Director of the Canadian Mental Health Association here in Truro, Colchester East Hants area. We've been in the community since 1985, but I guess over the past 10 years since I've been here, we've really tried to increase our presence and awareness in the community. We are what you would call in the health system Tier 1 and Tier 2, and maybe a little bit of Tier 3. We take over sort of before the clinical. We're separate and distinct. We do not provide counseling or therapy, but we provide a psychosocial approaches, and we can help people figure out if they need clinical services. And certainly we're always assessing folks, and may suggest that depending on how they're coping and the impact that mental health has, or illness or unwellness has made on their lives, that they can seek out different therapeutic and interventions. So we're kind of at the community level, and provide, we look at the social determinants of health and Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and try to provide some of the supports around things that provide mental illness, even basic things. Right now, we've switched all of our supports and services to virtual, as many of you have, and it's had a few hiccups, as we all know. Probably the biggest challenge is the fact that not everyone has internet, and when you're trying to reach people in remote areas, it's particularly challenging. So, but we're going to plug away, keep going, and there's always the phone line. So we've been that's probably the best way to describe our supports and services. We provide everything from, we have two small options homes and support for the more severely impacted. They provide 24-hour support there, all the way through to, as we call it, a tea and a talk, just trying to find out what you might need, share your feelings, and then look potentially at different resources.
Wow, that is great. I'm so happy to have all of you with us today. So, one of the things that, we're hearing from businesses at this point in time, many of our workers have gone home to work remotely. So they're still working, but working very, very differently than what normal would be. So our normal has gone out the window, and now we find ourselves trying to deal with a lot of change management on top of other stressors in life. So with many employers and employees working from home and sharing spaces with other people, perhaps a spouse, or having children home and needing the schooling done, maintaining other responsibilities. So what advice do you have for those that are feeling extremely overwhelmed? And let's start with you, Pascale.
I've definitely been feeling the overwhelm along with everybody else. I've been home. I've got 3 kids, trying to run my own business with all my 3 kids. We also just relocated to a new part of the province. So things have been tough. And I know what's been helping me most, and what I teach most of my clients, is to really hone in on the roles that are important to us. So for example, the roles that are most important to me are mother, entrepreneur, and a partner. And I really focus on the actions I take each day to support those roles that are important to me and make space for those first. A lot of us right now, we're also juggling, we're the full-time house cleaner, and that role is a lot bigger. A lot of our roles have expanded so much that they're really heavy to take on. So I think focusing on the ones that are most important to us, creating space for those first, and then letting other things slide if they need to. I know my housekeeper role is not that important to me right now. You would understand if you stepped into my house. Things like that, we need to learn to let go a little bit right now, or we will drive ourselves crazy. And also reaching out for support. I know that isolation, we're supposed to be in isolation right now, so it may seem really easy to slide into not connecting with others, and it might seem like nothing to go 2 or 3 weeks without talking to another person. But in times like that, even if it is just like Susan said, a tea and a talk to check in with somebody, so that you're actually connecting with another human being instead of just, videos or Netflix or whatever, that's really important to our mental health. And to check in with people if they haven't checked in with us in a while, I think is very important, especially our employees if they're working from home and goodness knows what they're handling besides just their work. It's important to make sure that we're just checking in with each other.
Wonderful points. Irene, was there anything that you wanted to add to that line of thinking?
Pascal really had wonderful points there. I'd like to add the fact that it's not the time to work on being a perfectionist. The stress and the overwhelm it's just such a distressing time that we need to lower our expectations of ourselves just that little bit, or maybe even a lot, because it's not possible to be doing 100% plus of everything that we would like to be doing and that require of ourselves, you know, on a regular basis. And I really would encourage people to prioritize, absolutely, as Pascal spoke to, and to take breaks. You know, we can lower our overwhelm by just stepping away from whatever is the pressure in front of us in the moment and breathing. Even a sigh is a very effective tool for stimulating our parasympathetic nervous system, stimulating that healing side of us and that calming side of us. So some real quick meditation tips, you know, to breathe, to exhale nice and long, make a sigh, and to feel your body. Because often when we're overwhelmed, we're so in our head and we're spinning, that we need to really feel our body, get in touch with our feet on the floor, you know, to really feel what's going on inside of us and take those nice breaths, long exhale, so we can just really settle ourselves as we go about prioritizing and choosing just the right tasks that we can accomplish and not more in the run of a day.
That is fantastic advice, to remember to breathe. I know that I've said that and had my staff say it to me over the past few weeks too, just remembering to breathe. Ruth, would you like to add to that?
Sure. Yeah, I was thinking the same thing, Sherry. The breathing is invaluable. we don't realize how much. I guess I was just thinking, with us, we're a lot of more people working at home. I mean, we kind of have that lack of schedule and that we might have had at the office place. So I think sometimes if you really need to be productive and you have a lot of demands around you, it can be helpful to create that schedule yourself. So to tell yourself, okay, this is my time for, like you said, Pascal, you have different roles. So this is the time I'm scheduling in for my work. This is the time I'm scheduling in for my kids. And this is when we're doing family time, this is partner time, that sort of thing. But to also remember, you include like me time during that too. So if you have a really busy household, then you might consider getting up a little earlier just to have that little time for yourself, or going to bed a little earlier, whatever, or having a midday walk or that kind of thing. So I think the schedule can help, and just hearing, or sorry, there was a thing that you touched on, but it's mostly the schedule that I was thinking about that can be helpful in spending, and make sure you include yourself on that.
No, those are all great points. Susan, is there anything else that you could add to that? How to help people working from a home environment that's all new and different?
Well, I would like to say to people to first recognize that you are being called on to do many things that you've never been called on before. I love Pascal's comment about housework. Maybe we had people coming in that were doing different services for us, and we don't have them anymore. That service doesn't exist. So, you're doing everything from cooking more potentially, to say, anyway, we're just being bombarded with different roles. And then in between Zoom meetings, we're supposed to somehow entertain and educate our children. So it's a huge amount of stress. And even, you're talking about it, our spare time, we don't have any spare time, I believe, during these times, because the spare time we had is now jam-packed with activities to support the different roles, as people are suggesting. So, recognize that and be kind to yourself. We're all doing the best we can. And the reality is, before this all started, I wasn't great at housework either, Pascal. So why would I expect that I'm going to be super at that now, and at, a gourmet chef on top of that? So being kind. Also, I love the scheduling aspect. That was what I was going to mention. Much like a soccer mom, although I wouldn't suggest but we are trying to juggle a lot of roles. But put it up on the board. Schedule that time. Maybe when you're checking in and doing your emails, that that's quiet time for the kids. That's when they read a book, so that you're almost marrying activities and making sure that everybody is almost responsible for some time on their own as well. The other thing too, if the employer is recognizing that, it's a great starting point for a conversation, reassuring the employer that we know you're doing the best you can and that you are juggling a number of roles at home, making a list, as someone suggested, and prioritizing and asking for help. And then, even the final point I'd like to make around that is it's okay to cut corners right now. Buy paper plates and throw them out, leave the wash for the day, or maybe even pull the kids in and incorporate that into your schedule. It's a great learning opportunity to help kids learn how to, if they don't already, know how to do various household chores. And part of your schedule can actually be, let's sort the laundry and put it out in the line. And then you're kind of getting two things done at once. So, yeah.
Those are great points. And, we may have some help around the house that we didn't think of how we could better use what we may already have access to, and using those as teaching moments as well. Then that also leads into another question that we have here. So, as employers, we know our employees are working remotely. There are still expectations in place of how they would be working. What are some of the questions that employers should be asking their employees to, gauge their mental health, those check-ins? What's an appropriate way for doing that? And let's start with you, Irene.
Certainly, I think it's so important to be aware of how your employees are managing and aware of how you are managing. So checking in with yourself first is something I really encourage all of us to do. And then we're more able to, to extend that care and compassion to our employees. And I'd suggest really being aware of what the largest expectations of your employees are right now, so you know if they're meeting them or not. And regularly checking in on deliverables so that you can gauge if they're on track or not. And if noticing that they're slipping, that they're struggling, then being able to raise that question can be a difficult thing for sure. And we always need to be aware of, employees' privacy. Yet it's certainly to have a private conversation with people if you notice that they're struggling, and have resources ready to offer them. So I know the government website has resources available, and each of us have resources, and there's tons of resources available that can be accessed. And it's easy to steer employees in certain directions if you feel that they're really struggling. And most of all, it's raising in team conversations the fact that, this is really hard for all of us. We're all outside of our comfort zone and we're not working optimally. So it's fair to struggle right now and to own up to that and to find the way to reach out and seek support. Absolutely.
Fantastic. And you touched a little bit on productivity as well, that, that's somewhat part of that conversation, and, those mental health check-ins with your employees and how to have that conversation, but also trying to gauge, a little the productivity and expectations around what that would be from working from home. So Ruth, do you have anything to add to that?
Sure. I think sometimes it's just as simple as checking in with your employees. So if you made that a regular part of either your work week or even day, to schedule like a how are you doing kind of thing. And it's just if you had it as a regular thing and not something that built up over time, then the conversation would be shorter and potentially, and it would just have a chance to just check in, say, how are you doing? How are things at home? Just have that little personal feel that the employee feels valued. And then you're just doing maintenance at that point. And then when you're doing that maintenance, I think you have a better feel for what's going on with all your employees. And at that point, you're probably going to recognize if something's changing. So versus sort of, let's wait until something really bad goes on and then I have to kind of dig out from this. If you're checking in with them on a regular basis, you're going to notice those changes. If the person's starting to be a lot more disengaged, or you can sense their stress level going up, that kind of thing. Because and a bit like what Irene, you were saying, it's not going to be the same for everyone, but if you're able to admit that these are uncertain times, and I'm not comfortable with like I don't know what's going on either. If you could admit your own anxiety, your own unsureness, whatever, then that can be helpful too. But I think really it's just paying attention and picking up on those subtle clues sometimes.
Oh, that is absolutely true. And I know how important it is for us at the Chamber to have, we check in with each other daily and just, talk a little bit about how we're doing and some unique things that we face in supporting each other. And I think not just the employer with the employee, but having, a group chat and being able to bring, more people into it and talk like we are today. It's great. Susan, what are some of your thoughts on that?
Well, I certainly agree with what everyone is suggesting. It's almost like a reflective supervision style, I think, that you should bring to those conversations. It's kind of tough, though, if you haven't had that sort of relationship with your employees prior to this, then to jump in. And as Ruth was saying, it's kind of, you almost have to look at it as a comparison over time to be able to pick up some of those subtleties, but it's never too late to start, of course. I've heard about supervisors who check in on Zoom with their employees every day. And then I've heard also on Fridays, they have a little happy hour. You bring your beverage of choice and you finish off the week with some encouraging words and really some, positive leadership, and that shows appreciation and an awareness of where your employees might be. I would suggest you just avoid yes/no questions and ask things like, on a scale of 1 to 10, how's your stress level these days? How are you coping at home? What's your work-life balance like? Are there any things that you're struggling with? And really, I think the most important thing is, how can I, as your supervisor, support you? And really listen and then follow through with that, which is really important. Employees need to see that right now, particularly, that you do care about their welfare and that you're willing to stand with them, even when it's something as silly as paper plates or, not being, they may feel it's silly. This one thing I'd like to mention too, is I think employees are really struggling too with guilt. The productivity. I'm not as productive, of course, working from home. And right now that's okay. And that they may need reassurance from you that you're not going to, in your next evaluation, that's not going to come up, that during this rotten time, hard, stressful time, that you really weren't as productive as you could have been. So being able to reassure employees, I think, around your expectations and what you're looking for is really important now too.
Oh, that's great. And certainly, finding ways to bring joy during a work time that is uncertain with a happy hour, not just always talking about work, but, including a little bit of inspiration in there on different activities. Pascale, what are some of your thoughts on the topic?
I really like what you all said. It really resonates with me that we really have to make sure we're caring for ourselves right now, especially when we're leading other employees or leading any kind of group of people, whether it be just our own children and families or employees in our businesses, that we can't really serve them if we're not serving from a place of wellness within ourselves. So making sure that we're taking care of ourselves during this time is the number one thing we can do for our employees. But one thing I always suggest, I really like what Ruth said about how it should be kind of an ongoing conversation. Mental health really does need to be an ongoing conversation in the workplace. But I know that sometimes when we come up against a pandemic or something like this, and it hasn't been a conversation up till now, that can be kind of difficult. It's like, how do you check in with your employees if that hasn't been something regular, up to date? One thing I always suggest in the hiring process, but you can really start anytime, is to ask your employees what they do to de-stress or what they do to make them feel alive in their spare time outside of work, and just get to know them a bit on a personal level that way. And then if you're not wholly comfortable with discussing mental health, that can seem very heavy and big sometimes, just check in with them and ask them how often they're doing those things. Have you been going for bike rides lately? Or have you been going swimming? Whatever it is that their thing is, know what those things are that help them, and just check in with them to make sure they're doing those things regularly. Also, I find, my whole business is really cracking open these conversations, because I know a lot of times it is hard for businesses to approach mental health. So a lot of times I suggest offering education, whether your employees recognize the need for it or not. You can always offer them an online workshop on stress management or burnout. You know what I mean? You don't need to make them uncomfortable and ask them how their personal stress is, because maybe they're not comfortable talking about that with their employer, but maybe they would be open to receiving the education, and that could help them manage their stress individually.
That is a wonderful point to make too, that sometimes the comfort level isn't there depending on the relationship, that being able to offer outside resources is great. And you touched on, physical activity with biking, walking being part of mental health. So Ruth, I'll direct this question to you first. So how strong is the link between mental health and physical health? And, are workers experiencing elevated levels of stress at a higher risk of contracting COVID-19? Like how do those things fit together?
Well, I do believe that everything is connected. So I don't even like to compartmentalize between mental and physical or spiritual or whatever you want to put in there, because we're all one. And I think that we tend to get into trouble sometimes when we do compartmentalize it, because we are separating our health, and it's just our general wellness that I think we need to be concerned about. So if sometimes somebody could be too far into one, and that's how we can get out of balance when we compartmentalize them. So we might be really good at doing our runs and biking or whatever you want to do, but we do so much of that it becomes an escape, and we're not really focused on the rest of us, the rest of our wellness. So I think our biggest benefit to ourselves could be to be in tune with who we are and learning a little bit more about what we need at any given time. And so feeling what you need to feel when you need to feel it. So sometimes it could be that you need that bike ride, or another times you might really need to be creative and sit down and write or draw or art or anything like that, whatever appeals to you. Or maybe it's your mental side that we need to get to, and that's like where we need to take on a project or work or something like that. So it's just really recognizing your balance. And so in terms of what an employee might need, like Pascal said, you might want to check in with them what they're doing. But during this particular time, it has been challenging, because our gyms and our pools and all those things are closed right now. So, what can you do when you really want to when you really need that outlet that you're used to? And so exploring with them and looking at those options. I mean, people have been really resourceful in finding those physical options these days. And one benefit is obviously having the spring and summer on our way, so we can go outdoors. And then finding like the videos like that might help you do the workouts in the home, if that's what your appeal is or whatever. But again, it's being resourceful and really paying attention to what it is you need, and trying to recognize when something becomes an escape versus what you actually do need at that time. So so to answer your question, I think that everything is blended, and it's really become our wellness that we're in a whole bigger sphere.
No, I think those are really great points. And if if any of you have resources for online workouts or online physical activities that we could share out after this, or any members that may be on this webinar, if you have some, or if you're doing some and recording them that can be used by other people, reach out to the chamber, let us know, and we will share those out. So we'll move on to Susan. What are some of the I guess, talk about the link between mental health and physical health?
Well, I agree with everything that Ruth said. I believe they're intertwined as well. You probably won't see much disagreement on that issue from any of us. It's interesting, though, about stress. Someone like myself might be able to take a certain level of stress, if you put it that way, and then my colleague may not be able to take that level of stress. They have a very different reaction, where I'm calm, they may be, experiencing a lot of anxiety. And I think it's really important to keep track of that, because you can have a staff member who, if they're not feeling supported by you, can then go to another staff member for support and actually escalate them. So it's kind of important, I think, to keep your pulse on everything. Now, in terms of whether or not it directly impacts contracting COVID-19, that'll be interesting to see. Certainly all the theories would support that, but we haven't heard much about that yet. And when you see the amount of stress that the first responders are under, you would think that then they would, and particularly where it's all around them, be picking that up. So it's a very interesting concept. Yeah. So stress, I think, is probably the biggest factor in this that we have to try to monitor right now, because certainly that has impacts on and is documented on our physical health. So trying to support employees' levels of stress is very important for overall wellness right now.
And Pascal, what are your thoughts on it?
I certainly agree with what everyone's saying. I think when I approach this, I definitely agree that there is a very strong link between physical and mental health. And I agree with what Ruth said, is that it's really, you can't see them as separate. If you're not taking care of your physical health, then chances are that your mental health is suffering, and vice versa. But what I find is most important when we're having this conversation with others is to frame this link in a positive light. Because anybody who's concerned with contracting COVID-19, they're probably very well aware of the link between stress and physical health, and having that, like, oh, hey, did you know that the more stressed you are, you could catch COVID-19 easier? That's not going to help them. That's sinking them a little deeper into their stress rather than offering them a life raft. So we want to really frame the conversation in a positive light, that instead of make sure that you're not missing your exercise, hey, did you do anything for your body today? Have you done any deep breathing or done anything for your physical health? And just trying to encourage, even if it's, getting up another 15 minutes early to stretch when you start your day. Maybe you can't make it to the gym, but you can go for a walk around the block. Really focusing on what we can add to our daily routine is in terms of physical health, rather than what we're missing out on. Because I know for myself, one of the biggest things I do to support my mental health is the gym. And I have been missing out on that a lot. But just framing things in a positive light and seeing what we can add to our routines in terms of physical health instead of what we're missing out on, I think is important. And trying not to focus on the worry of whether or not we're at a higher risk because of what we're missing out on.
Now, worry certainly does compound more worry. There's no doubt about that. Irene, what are your thoughts on the link?
Absolutely, the link exists. Stress really does lower our immune system, cause all sorts of body problems, and body problems can cause then more stress for us mentally. So absolutely, the link exists, no question. And I like to take the chance to look at this positively too, like Pascal was saying, because given that there's so much emphasis on the mental health impact, through the pandemic, it's a chance for us to lower stigma even more around prioritizing our mental health and learning how to just generally build mental health practices and reach out when we need it. So given that we know the link exists so strongly between physical health and mental health, I really encourage us to think about what we do every day to build our health practices. And it's looking at how we de-stress, how we're building resilience, even our nutrition. You know, most people have mentioned so far physical exercise is a wonderful way to combat stress. Well, nutrition is really important too. Looking at brain health food, you know, the green leaf veggies. And I know everyone has been so busy baking bread and treats and cookies and things, and I've fallen into that myself, I have to admit. Yet, if we can think a little bit more about the food that's going to serve us right now and build our strength and health, rather than just comforting us right now, I think that's important. So, I find being outdoors is something else that is so key to building our whole sense of resiliency. And for many people living in apartments right now, it's been very difficult to get outside, and we can't go to the parks like we used to. So even standing on a balcony or a doorstep for 5 minutes, or even opening a window if that's all that you have, and looking outside, focusing on those trees, hearing the sounds of the birds, smelling the smells of the outside, and seeing the sky, you know, those are ways to strengthen us and to lower our stress.
So
So
really
we really
needing
do
to
need to be creative right now. Yeah.
taking
Yeah.
in things in our environment that do bring us joy. So I have one more question, and I'll direct that to Susan, and then I see a couple questions that were submitted, so I'll ask those after this. So Susan, we'll come to you and say, you know, feeling worry, stress, and anxiety during this time of upheaval seems to be quite common, and it is widespread. Like everybody that we talk to is having some stress of some kind or another, or feelings right now. You know, what level of stress would you consider is normal, and what point would you recommend someone reach out for help to manage those feelings?
Well, I guess it always comes down to extremes and impact on individuals. I talked earlier about how I may be able to handle a certain level, if you want to put it that way, of stress, and I may see a colleague or a loved one not having the same event occur, but handling it in a very different way, better for worse. So to us, it's always around how much the person feels that this is impacting their lives and interfering with their lives potentially. So if you can't sleep for 2 or 3 nights, and I know with the recent tragedy, I think all of us were impacted in these ways. But if this goes on for a week or more, that's the point where, you know, we all go down, but if we don't come back up within a reasonable period of time, it's important to get some support and help. The other thing too is I saw an interesting article, I think it was on social media, around the amount of alcohol and cannabis addictions going up this time during this pandemic time, that their sales are soaring. That's something else to be aware of with employees. People are looking for different ways to cope, and unfortunately, traditionally, we tend to go to substances and maybe cake as well to manage our stress. And just keeping an eye on that. Again, if you're noticing things that you might have noticed in the workplace, you know, people not showing up, people late for meetings, assignments not getting passed in, that there may be something going on there that you may need to have a conversation about. So I would say it was around the impact and not being able to, and Irene already talked about resilience. It's such an important word right now. Not being able to kind of feel like you're getting your feet back under you, and still feeling detached, maybe dissociated. You don't feel like your head and your heart are meeting, and you just feel like you're floating. If that's happening for a week or more, reach out and try some of the techniques that have already been discussed here. I think Irene talked about going out in nature. I've received great comfort, particularly in the last week or so, by going outside and listening to the birds. Mother Nature doesn't know we have a pandemic, and Mother Nature doesn't know the tragedy that we experienced. And there's hope. that you get from seeing the flowers poking up out of the ground again, you know, by planting seeds. But just putting your hands in the earth, there's an actual kind of grounding yourself that you can experience by going outside and seeing that regardless of the stress and the experiences we're going through, that there's a rhythm to life, and that rhythm continues even when we're feeling like we don't know where our heads are and what day it is.
There is certainly a healing power to nature. And as we move to Pascale for your thoughts, I'm just going to add a little thread in here that, you know, we talk about, you know, how to know when you've reached the point where you need to reach out. But what if you feel, you know, even as an employer, that you have an employee that is in need of help but isn't reaching out? Like, how do you deal with someone who may not want to admit that they do need the help?
That's a really tough one, especially now where we're dealing with such uncertain times, is that people's mental health issues are going to look different than they normally do. You know what I mean? We're all struggling in very different ways. I would say where the concern, I mean, I would argue that, I don't think it's really an argument, but I would say that we should be offering support for our employees' mental health. We should be offering mental health education regardless of if we see a concern. Those supports should be in place so that they know they have somewhere to reach out to when there is a concern, but it shouldn't be a reactive process. It should be a proactive process. In terms of if you have an employee that's not reaching out for the support and you think they do need it, it's very hard in times like this when people are at home. I mean, how do you reach out to them? Again, all you can do as an employer is really consistently checking in and offering the support that's there, making referrals when it's necessary. I know that's my business. A lot of sometimes I will, a workshop or some education isn't going to help, and you do need counseling. So making those contacts available to your employees is important. But just keeping the conversation open, I think, is all we can do right now. And I just noticed briefly, I haven't read the chat in full, but somebody mentioned, how do we support our employees when we're dealing with this ourselves? We all feel so overwhelmed and so stressed, and everything's uncertain for all of us. Like, half the time we don't know what we're doing. So how can we lead others when we're so uncertain? And I think the answer there is just transparency and honesty and connection. We cannot lead others if we're being dishonest and pretending like we know what's going on when we don't. So I think just being very clear with our employees when we can, giving them all the education and support that we're able, but also being honest in the fact that we're going through this with you too. You know what I mean? We're all in very uncertain times, and it's okay to have days where you don't know what you're doing. But like Susan said, if it leads to more than a few days and you get that floaty feeling that you really don't know where you are for a week or so, then you do need a referral to some more than just the employer can support you.
Those are excellent points to make, Pascale. Thank you. So Irene, we'll come to you now, and the original question has a couple new threads in there. When is too much stress too much? Leading others when you're trying to be strong and look after all those around you. How do you look after yourself? And also, when people don't necessarily admit that they need help, how do you help them?
Well, Susan did a wonderful job, and Pascale as well, of outlining the things to be looking for in terms of particular symptoms that people may be feeling to indicate that there's a problem. So I won't really go over those again in the interest of time. But I will say it's important for us to realize that when we're really stressed, we tend to default back to old coping strategies, and they may not be serving us now. So it's important to have that ability to reflect and ask yourself, what am I doing given that I am so stressed? Is this helping me? What is one thing that I can do differently? What is one new thing that I might try from all of the things that have been mentioned? And You know, through this whole pandemic, I've really been thinking about the fact that we are stuck in the bottom of Maslow's hierarchy of needs in ensuring our basic survival, and we're missing certainty and connection the most. And in what small ways can we find little bits even of certainty and connection to help ourselves? So, you know, we've talked a lot so far about how you can be connecting with your employees and connecting with other people, even for your own support. That's essential, using all the virtual creative ideas that exist, that are out there. And the other piece of the certainty is, you know, asking, what can I be certain of right now in the midst of such an incredibly uncertain time when the ground is just shifting under our feet every day? What can I be certain of? What can I hang on to? And what do I know to be true? And asking those questions for yourself, and then having those conversations with your staff and your teams as well. You're talking in a team setting about, what can we be certain of? What do we know? You know, are our jobs okay for now? Trying to give out as much certainty as you can, and recognizing what is not certain and what the main pieces of the stressors are. And then, of course, all that Susan and others outlined in terms of the particular symptoms to watch out for. Those are things to keep in mind as well.
Great. Thank you so much, Irene. So Ruth, would you like to add to that?
Sure, and we're all great points from everyone. Thanks. I guess we're creatures of habit, and we really like familiarity, and we like our comfort zone. But oftentimes it's in that comfort zone that we're not growing, and this is sort of an opportunity for us to grow and to seek things inward. It's another thing that I like to stress is, like, sometimes we just need to feel what we're feeling when we need to feel it. So if we can identify those feelings as they come to us versus allowing them to build up in us, and then sitting in one too long, then that's sort of the danger area. But if we can feel them as they come, we can tend to balance ourselves out a lot better. Also, something we're really good at is staying one step ahead of ourselves and multitasking and all those types of things in our busy lives, or what was our busy lives. So I would suggest kind of that I'm a big fan of single tasking over multitasking, actually, and I think we can be a lot more productive with that way of thinking. So I would suggest kind of refraining from trying to go to the next moment and thinking about being in the moment that we're in. And that can relieve a lot of anxiety as well, because if we're always thinking about that next thing and all the shoulds that we should be doing versus maybe, okay, what am I feeling right now? What do I want today? And where am I right now? And what do I have control over right now? So I think that just sort of removing all those rules from our life and focusing a little bit on just who we are and what we have right here. That's what we have control over.
Oh, Ruth, that was fantastic. And I know that, you know, the word should puts a lot of pressure on each of us when we're thinking we should do this and should do that. And it may not fit in with the priorities that we have at that point in time. And, you know, that was really good that you brought that up. So one of the questions that was in the chat that we didn't get to touch on before we move to closing remarks was, someone had asked, you know, suggestions on the amount of time on the news or what's going on in the world. I mean, we're all getting sucked into a vortex on social media and the news, not just with COVID, but other community events. So, you know, how do you handle wanting to stay in touch with what's going on in your communities and in the news? And then maybe is there a healthy amount of time to be exposed to these news feeds? And Ruth, where you're up, there's a comment. We'll start here, and then if anyone else would like to add, we'll go to you.
Sure. I think it's, again, this is going to be about kind of knowing yourself and what you can handle and what you need. If you feel like you're kind of drifting into a way of it's almost like an addiction. I need to know more. I need to know what's going on in the news, that kind of thing. Then you have to be really aware of that feeling, because it's becoming, it's sort of more of a need, or not even a need. It's just sort of an impulse. So if we can kind of gauge that and determine what it's doing to us, sort of stepping back from it to say, okay, how am I feeling right now, and why is my heart racing a little more, or anything like that. It could be because we've gone a little overboard in the media or whatever. So again, like, it's all about balancing and recognizing what you might need. So it might be that you only need 10 minutes and you might need to schedule it. Like, I'm only going to watch the news early in the day, because if I watch it at night, it's just going to sit with me all night and I'm not going to sleep. So you want to go back to your basic needs of sleeping and eating and hydrating, and making sure those are happening for you. And if you feel like they're not, then maybe that's contributing to it. So some people need to schedule it. Some people can handle a lot more. It's very individual.
And do you have thoughts on that, Susan?
Yes, I would absolutely repeat what Ruth says. And, she's referencing like almost like a body scan, being in touch with, the tightness of your stomach, your heart racing, are you getting headaches? Are you clenching your teeth? Some of the ways that our body responds to excess emotion, are those happening for you? And then are you able to discharge them in a way that then it doesn't impact on your life? So I've picked a couple of very trusted news sources that I find are complete, and I have tried to, my personal life, avoid social media or cut it off at a certain time. So you're right, trying to be in the know. And particularly with COVID-19, my staff are looking to me for that knowledge and for the dissemination of things that they need to pay attention to. So it's also important that I'm providing them without an overload. I'm not overloading them in the information I'm providing too, and kind of taking the tips that we're talking about there, and making sure that I'm giving my employees very distinct, particular information that's helpful. But the body scan is so important. Yeah.
That's great information. So Irene, was there anything you wanted to add to the need to limit or how we look at our news feeds these days?
I certainly echo everything that was said so far. And I would just add people checking in with their mind, noticing what are they thinking about? Is over focusing on the news becoming a distraction? Is it taking your healthy thinking down a road that doesn't seem to be serving you? So it's like Ruth said, it's that self-awareness, self-analysis, and noticing, like, yes, as Susan was describing, the impact of too much in your body, and it's also too much in your mind. And the thoughts getting scrambled and just not being able to focus on regular daily life, that's really a sign that you're overly indulging in news and it's impacting negatively. And I have to say, I know what that feels like, because in the beginning of COVID-19 and shortly after the mass shootings that had happened, I really was into social media, the news, multiple sources, multiple times a day, and it takes a toll. And it takes us away from a healthy, productive, focused day. So, and that can, impede our ability to even be supportive and sharing compassion right now. So it is really important to limit it, maybe once a day, twice a day, and choose who you're following. Not everybody's opinion is going to be helpful right now.
No, I think that reinforces the importance that, getting your information from reliable accurate sources is also important, that may, help limit some of the drama and experience that goes along with that. So Pascale, we're going to move to you and have you answer the question. And then if there's, one thing you want to leave people with today, we'll begin our closing remarks. So over to you.
Okay, well, on the topic of social media, I really resonate with what everyone said. It's so important to know ourselves and check in with and know when we're taking in too much information. One habit I've noticed that a lot of people have these days that contributes to their stress is when we take that time out in our day, say we're having a stressful day and we have 5 minutes to sit down and put our feet up, it's become really habitual to look at our phone and to either check our email or check our social media. And maybe we're not reading the news. Maybe we're not maybe we're trying to focus on the positive, but either way, we're still not focusing on our wellness. It's still a distraction from that deep breath that we may need to take, or that time in nature that we need to take. It's sort of like just a very easy way to take a break from the day, but I don't think we're really taking a break as often as we feel we are. It's adding to the mental noise that we have going on in our head. So even if you find yourself habitually checking your phone, maybe replace a few of those phone checks with a walk outside or a deep breath instead. I know people do like to stay connected, and especially with recent events, like the mass shooting. There was another incident in Halifax shortly after where people thought gunshots were going off. And I think that whole situation was really highlighted by social media, because people got on their phones and they were like, oh my goodness, I heard this noise here, I heard this noise there. And it was a very clear example of how things can get hyped up and social media can really increase anxiety. When sometimes just taking a step back and taking that breath that we need would be more beneficial. So in closing remarks, I just want to thank you guys so much for putting this together. Not only is it just nice to connect with other humans outside of my own home, but it's really nice to open up the talks about mental health and see what everyone else is dealing with. I think we all feel like we're dealing with really individual stresses right now because it's so new and we've never been dealing with, like you said, Sherry, this is the first time I've ever seen a state of emergency. But the mental health issues that we're having and the stress we're all under is a very shared experience. So I'm glad we could come together and discuss that. And in terms of any business needs that you have in dealing with your employees' mental health, I like to serve as the point where if you're not sure how to open up these conversations with your employees and you feel like your employees may be struggling, or you can foresee that they may be struggling in the future and you want to set up those supports proactively, I'm there for that. If your employees need further assistance, then I can offer them through workshops or support groups or classes. I can offer referrals to people like Irene and Ruth. And yeah, that's what I'm there for. So thank you guys very much.
Wonderful. And thank you for your time, Pascal. And I will point out too that the 4 presenters we have today are all chamber members, and they have information and links on our website. So even if you missed the email that we send out after this, you can find them there with our group on our website. Irene, we'll go to you. So what are some of your last closing remarks, things you'd like people to take away with them today?
Again, I want to thank you for this conversation, Sherry. It's just been an amazing opportunity to build more connection in the stressing time that we're in. One thing that I'm really aware of that I want to share in my closing remarks is our natural brain-wired tendency to have self-criticism forefront in our minds. We're wired to be thinking of the negative in order to survive, yet it's very much overdone. And the stress is all about how we are criticizing ourselves right now for not being better, for not doing better, given hugely stressing circumstances. So my hope and my wish for all of us is that we can learn to move away from some of that judgment, that negative self-criticism, and simply say to ourselves, I'm okay. And may I just be peaceful in this moment. So giving ourselves those wishes for peacefulness, for health, is a way to step away, even for a moment, from that judgment and that self-criticism. And mindfulness is really the heart of the foundation that offers us that teaching around being non-judgmental. And I am going to be offering a mindfulness program in the community very soon. So if anyone is interested in that, I really encourage you to reach out to me. And, I just really wish everyone all the best in implementing all the tips we've talked about.
Wonderful. And again, I'll just reinforce that where you are chamber members, the information will be shared through our social media and our website as well. So we want people in our community to be able to connect with the services that you provide. Ruth, what are some of your thoughts and closing remarks, something you want people to remember after today's session?
That's a good one. Everyone said so much already. I think I really think we can take advantage of the time that we've been given right now, to think differently about ourselves possibly, because we've really gotten good at routine and following that routine and being almost mindless about our day-to-day activities. So this may be an opportunity to be a little bit more mindful. And if you find your mind kind of going in those circle thoughts, I like to call them, where you're kind of like spinning, just recognizing and finding opportunities to interrupt that, or even if you're finding that self-critic coming in, challenging it whenever you have an opportunity, or just disrupting the thought pattern. So really it's an opportunity for us to start thinking for ourselves again, and valuing that, just believing in ourselves.
That's a very interesting perspective, really trying to find the positive in a situation that is negative and unexpected, but, looking for things that we can use to strengthen us as we move through this on the other side. So again, thank you so much, Ruth, for being here, and everyone for being here.
And thank you, Sherry. I wanted to say thank you for putting this on. It's a good
we appreciate it. And we'll be listening to our members and what their needs are. And, if they want us to come together and do this again, then we're going to make that happen for them. So I appreciate it. So Susan, if there's something that you want someone to take away from today, what are your closing thoughts?
Well, I guess, again, thank you so much for this opportunity. Now and post-pandemic, they're saying there's going to be a resurgence, of course, of mental health issues. And so it's really great we're starting these conversations now, and hopefully we can continue them. So I very much appreciate the opportunity, and to really sit on a panel with some wonderful, highly qualified individuals in our community. It's been an honor for me to join in on the conversation. I would just like to remind people that you are your own best mental health advocate, and becoming aware, being honest with yourself about what you need, how you feel, and what you need to be your best self, being honest, and then asking for that is very important. And it actually is at the root of a healthy and connected community. And it is also, as an employer, I think, an excellent model that you can offer to your employees. So we are here to help as well, if there's anything at all we can do. And, much love to my community.
Great. Well, again, from all of our members and our staff and our board, I just want to thank you for being here today and sharing your wisdom, your advice, and the helpful tips with people who need them now and will need them down the road. And I hope that we can come together and continue to support our communities in ways that only the Chamber can. So again, thank you so much for your time. Our website is www.colchesterchamber.com, where you can access the contact information for our presenters, and we will be sending a follow-up email out with some of the resources that were mentioned and contact information for them as well. So I am very thankful to have had this session. I know I'm taking a lot away from it myself today, and I look forward to connecting with our members in the future. So thank you, everyone.